this court was the court that sustained Scott Walker's assault on labor rights. And that's the core, the original sin of Scott Walkerism when he took on public employee unions and then later private sector unions. This court can address some of those issues. This court can also, I think perhaps most significantly from a political standpoint at this point, address the issue of reproductive rights, because it is very likely that Wisconsin's 1849 ban on abortion will come to this court, this new court. And if it does, there is a very good likelihood that they will do the logical thing and throw it out. So a lot has shifted in one election. And for you two, I will say, knowing how long you have focused in very frustrating circumstances on electoral politics, this is a case where kind of the long game in electoral politics seems to have really played off in one key state, or played out in a good way in one key state.
Yeah. Well, that's nice for a change, because when you look everywhere else, what we've basically seeing has been like the Federalist Society takeover. So it's nice to see something going in the other direction. We're, in Florida, I have little hope for my bodily autonomy here. So I want to wear a Handmaid's Tale costume.
Well, Wisconsin feels that way right now. You should be clear. Wisconsin is a state that polling suggests is about, 65 to 70% pro-choice. I mean, in the classic definition of pro-choice. If you even take the narrower definition of, at least some baseline protections, then you get up into, 80, 90% pro-choice. It's a very, very pro-choice state. And yet, when the Supreme Court overturned the Roe v. Wade decision with the Dobbs decision in June of 2022, Wisconsin ricocheted right back to 1849. That's when our anti-abortion law was put on the books. And, shame on the legislatures through the years, they never took it off. So as a result, when that court decision came down, we had this zombie law, from, before women could vote, from before the Civil War, that suddenly became our defining law as regards reproductive rights. Only if the court takes this up and throws it out will it be undone. The legislature's not going to undo it. The governor doesn't have the power to do it. But this shift in control of the court on April 4th, when Janet Protasiewicz, a judge from Milwaukee, defeated former Supreme Court Justice Dan Kelly, only that shift opens the door for restoration of reproductive rights in Wisconsin, and frankly, a host of other initiatives that kind of either bring us to or keep us in the 21st century.
No pun intended. And, I was just thinking, Wisconsin has been taking it on the chin for so long. It's it's the one state in the history of this country that has actually cast their electoral votes for a socialist. The fact that there's just such a rabid populist streak in this state, and it swings both ways. The problem is that the undue influence of the Koch brothers in your state in particular has been felt for quite some time. Now, without having to open up old wounds, I look back at the 2016 election. I look at how well Bernie in particular did in Wisconsin. In fact, I felt that his touchstone moment, the moment that really showed he was going to be a real force, was at the beginning of June in 2015 when he held that rally at the University of Wisconsin. About 10,000 people showed up. I think we talked about this. It was sort of that moment where you knew something was in the air, something special could happen. And then I look at what happened as a result of that primary, and as a result of Hillary being the nominee, and the fact that Russ Feingold was not able to beat Ron Johnson. How much of an impact would you say the last 7 years, how different it probably would have been? Because I think for all intents and purposes, Bernie almost assuredly would have won Wisconsin over Trump. And even that one electoral shift would have likely resulted in Bernie being the president. How much different do you think Wisconsin would be today if it had more or less like a 6-7 year head start compared to where it is right now?
Well, let me put an exclamation mark on a couple of things you just said. Wisconsin, I think, would have gone for Bernie Sanders if he was the Democratic nominee in 2016. I think it would have gone for Bernie Sanders by a pretty substantial margin, because Sanders understood and was running on the issues of deindustrialization, free trade, and a whole rubric of economic issues, which Clinton just was not able to run on effectively. And as a result, he would have kept a lot of voters who either stood down and didn't vote or who went for Trump. So right off the bat, I think he would have had Wisconsin. But you should also add Michigan into that list as well, because Michigan was another state where Sanders did very, very well in the primaries, and then wasn't on the ballot in November. Obviously, he wasn't the nominee. I think he would have carried Michigan as well. So you start to actually begin to understand that if Sanders had been the nominee in 2016, there's a very real chance that Donald Trump would have been beaten, and that you would have actually had, a very different politics. But in some senses, you have to go back even further for Wisconsin and go back to that 2010 election. In 2010, the Republican wave election, that's the election in which Scott Walker came to power. Scott Walker immediately sought to solidify his power by doing something that we should be very conscious of. He sought to take away the ability of those who might stand up to him to act in the electoral arena, right? He took on public employee unions, dramatically weakened them. He took on the trial lawyers, dramatically weakened them. He went after basically every institution that might stand up to him. And then they changed the primary election dates so that students, primary elections wouldn't be held when universities were in session. They attacked voting rights. They did radical gerrymandering, all within a year, right? In a very short amount of time. And so as a result, they had radically disempowered their opposition. Now, then it didn't matter in 2012, in the November election, Barack Obama won the state easily. Tammy Baldwin won the state easily. But Democrats couldn't win the legislature back. They couldn't, get across the line. And so what you saw was a locking in structurally of barriers to the Democratic Party succeeding. And one of the reasons why that happened was that I would argue Democrats weren't as militant as they needed to be back in 2010, 2011, in that very difficult period. They made a lot of mistakes, and many of those mistakes kind of played out into the 2016 election and beyond. It's really a core question, which I think is one that you two understand very, very well. The Democratic Party didn't fight as hard as it needed to fight on fundamental economic and social and racial justice issues when the Republicans were on the rise back in 2010, 2011, 2012. And because there wasn't that united front, because there wasn't a hard enough fight, at that point, the Republicans got a tremendous advantage, and they used it at every turn that they could. There's a real lesson here, and that is that centrist politics don't work, right? They just don't work when you're in a very, very difficult battle. Now, it is true that if you get somebody as bad as Donald Trump in 2020, Joe Biden, who is more of a centrist, could win, yes. But the damage that has occurred up to that point is such that it takes you years, even decades, to undo it. And this is one of the lessons. I don't know if the Democratic Party is ever going to learn this. I wrote a book about it, The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party. And my argument is that this battle for a direction of the Democratic Party, be it either the centrist, very corporate direction, or a progressive direction that really is anti-corporate, that really is about, expanding democracy, bringing more people into the game. If you don't take that progressive path, then the Democrats are always going to be, kind of in this vulnerable place. They may win, there's no question. They will win in certain circumstances, but they won't win the kind of big victories and take the space that they need to take. And that's writ large across Wisconsin. Now Wisconsin has an opportunity to begin to undo some of the damage that's been done over the last 10, 11, 12, 13 years. But it won't happen if it's done cautiously, right? It won't happen if they take a centrist compromising route. There has to be a recognition that, it's not that you have to break any rules. It's not that you have to, be unfair. But what you do have to do is have a set of principles that are clear enough, that it actually are sort of like a North Star set of principles, that people will come out and vote for it and vote in big numbers for it. And I think that it's a long way of getting back to your core point. Had the Democratic Party allowed Bernie Sanders to be the nominee in 2016, I think that pretty much everything about America's current circumstance would be different. And frankly, as you know from my politics, I think it would be better. I think we would be, nothing would be easy. We wouldn't necessarily have gotten to single payer healthcare immediately. We wouldn't necessarily have gotten to free college immediately. But what I can tell you is, just think of how much better positioned we would be going into COVID, if and when COVID hit, right? How much better prepared we would have been for that. And how when we did respond to COVID, frankly, with a lot of, big government programs, right? Big spending to help people survive, instead of then immediately starting to dismantle them as COVID became less of a concern, we would have locked many of them in. And we'd be in a place now where I think as a country, we'd be headed toward something much closer to social democracy.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.